I never thought my marriage would unravel the way it did. For over a decade, my wife Michelle and I had what looked like a comfortable life in a quiet suburb just outside Detroit. I worked as a mid-level manager at an auto parts manufacturing plant, a steady job that paid the bills and then some. Michelle was a stay-at-home mom, pouring her time into raising our two kids, our 10-year-old daughter Emily and 6-year-old son Leo. We had a cozy home with a neat lawn, two cars, an SUV for the family, and a trusty sedan for my commute, and a golden retriever named Buddy who loved nothing more than to play fetch with the kids. From the outside, we were the picture of a stable, happy American family. Yet lately, something felt off. It started with little things. Things I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't known my wife so well. Michelle had always been an early riser, brewing coffee and packing the kids' lunches before I even stumbled out of bed. But in recent months, she'd begun sleeping in more, letting me handle the morning rush. She seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere as I talked about upcoming plans or the kids' schedules. I often had to repeat myself to get her attention. When I asked if everything was all right, she'd force a smile and say, "Just tired, Adam. It's nothing." Her explanation made sense at first. Being a full-time mom and homemaker is no easy job, and I figured maybe she was just burned out. I tried to help more around the house to give her a break, washing the dishes after dinner, taking the kids out on weekends so she could have some time to herself. Still, her mood didn't improve. If anything, she grew more distant. At night, instead of curling up next to me on the couch to watch our favorite TV shows, she retreated to the bedroom with her phone or a book. When I joined her, she often claimed a headache or said she was engrossed in a novel. Our once active love life had dwindled to nearly nothing. I chalked it up to stress or mid-30s hormones, trying not to take it personally, but a gnawing feeling in my gut told me there was more to it. There were other changes too. Michelle started paying extra attention to her appearance. She had always been pretty, brown hair that she usually kept in a simple ponytail, a warm smile that reached her green eyes, but she was never one to spend hours in front of the mirror. Lately, though, she began wearing makeup just to run errands, and I noticed new clothes in her wardrobe: tighter jeans, low-cut blouses, lacy undergarments that I certainly hadn't seen her wear before. When I playfully commented on one of the new dresses she wore to the grocery store, she blushed and mumbled something about wanting to feel good about herself. I wanted to believe her. After all, who doesn't like to feel attractive? But it still struck me as unusual. Then came the increase in her phone use. Michelle had never been glued to her phone, usually only checking it for coordinating playdates or answering her mother's texts. But now her phone was always buzzing with new messages. She started taking calls in other rooms, her voice hushed. If I walked into the room, she'd end the call abruptly or switch screens if she was texting. One night, as we sat in the living room, me flipping through channels, her scrolling on her phone, she suddenly laughed at something on the screen. I glanced over with a smile, happy to see her light up for once. "What's so funny?" I asked. She jumped, almost spilling her tea. "Oh, nothing. Just a silly meme from one of the moms," she said, quickly pressing the power button to lock the phone and set it face down on the coffee table. It was such a swift, defensive move that it took me aback. Michelle never hid things like that before. We often shared funny messages or gossip from our friends. Her reaction was a red flag, but I swallowed my doubts and forced a chuckle. "Must be one hilarious meme," I teased lightly. She just shrugged and changed the subject, asking if I'd remembered to take out the trash. In bed that night, I stared at the ceiling while she slept beside me, her back turned my way. My mind was whirling. Why was she being so secretive? Was I doing something wrong? I ran through possibilities. Maybe she was planning a surprise for my upcoming birthday, or perhaps she was struggling with some personal issue she didn't know how to discuss yet, something like anxiety or depression. We had always been able to talk about everything, but lately, she was shutting me out. I resolved to pay closer attention, to be supportive and patient, hoping it was just a phase. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns. Michelle often stepped out in the afternoons, usually around the time I got off work. She'd claim she was running to the store or had a meeting at Emily's school or a doctor's appointment. Sometimes she'd say her friend Lisa needed help with something. It sounded plausible enough, but on a few occasions when I offered to accompany her or help, she insisted it was fine and told me to relax at home or pick up the kids instead. One Wednesday, she said she needed to go into downtown Detroit to handle some paperwork for her late aunt's estate. She left dressed in a smart casual outfit I rarely saw her wear, with more makeup than a simple errand might warrant. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I found myself driving by the address she had mentioned, only to find the building's parking lot nearly empty and the offices closed for the day. I never confronted her about that lie, but it left a bitter taste in my mouth. The more I watched, the more it became clear that Michelle was lying to me about her whereabouts. Each time she left the house with a vague excuse, an uneasy suspicion tightened in my chest. I began to suspect the unthinkable, that she might be seeing someone else. The mere idea was like a punch to the gut. Michelle, my high school sweetheart, the woman who had stood by me for 10 years of marriage, betraying me? I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, we had built a life together. 2 beautiful children, countless memories. She wasn't the type to cheat, or so I thought, but the clues were adding up, and I couldn't ignore them. I found myself checking her phone when she wasn't looking, only to discover she had added a passcode. That was new. She'd never bothered with a lock screen before, saying she had nothing to hide. One evening, when she stepped out to take a phone call on the patio, I caught a glimpse of the screen lighting up before she picked it up. It showed a contact name P. My heart lurched. P could be anyone, Patricia from the PTA perhaps, but my instincts told me otherwise. We have a close friend named Peter, but he was my best friend, practically a brother to me, and also someone she knew well. Would she really label him just P in her phone? It seemed odd. When she returned, I casually asked, "Who was that on the phone?" She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Lisa," she lied smoothly after that tiny pause. "She was asking about the school fundraiser coming up." I nodded, not wanting to show that I doubted her, but my mind was screaming. Why lie about a call from our friend Lisa? Unless it wasn't Lisa at all. The possibility of Peter crossed my mind. Then just as quickly I dismissed it in disbelief. Peter Reynolds had been my best friend since college. We were both business majors at Michigan State and ended up moving to the Detroit area around the same time after graduation. We had seen each other through a lot. First jobs, his breakup with his fiancée years ago, the birth of my children. He's M's godfather, for crying out loud. He was Uncle Peter to my kids, always coming over for birthdays and holidays. He and I grabbed beers together most Friday nights, either at a local sports bar or in one of our backyards by the grill. He worked as a financial consultant for a large firm downtown. Smart guy, good job, always sharp with numbers. There was no one outside of my immediate family I trusted more. If something was bothering me, Peter was the guy I'd talk to. The idea that he of all people could be involved in this shadow of suspicion felt absurd. Yet once the thought occurred, I started to see little coincidences in a new light. Like how Peter had been dropping by the house at unusual times lately. Once I came home from work and he was in the driveway saying he had just swung by to lend Michelle a book. Another time when I called him to hang out, he said he was busy, only for my daughter to mention offhandedly the next day, "Oh, Uncle Peter came over yesterday to help Mommy fix the computer." He hadn't mentioned that to me at all. At the time, I'd thanked him for helping, thinking nothing of it. But now, putting the pieces together, I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Was I seeing patterns that didn't exist? Was my jealousy making me irrational? Or was there truly something going on between my wife and my best friend? I didn't want to believe it. I refused to make an accusation without proof. There was too much at stake. So I kept my suspicions to myself and continued to observe, hoping I'd be proven wrong. Nights became harder. I would lay beside Michelle, listening to her breathe, wanting so badly to roll over and ask her, beg her even, to tell me what was bothering her, to just be honest with me. But fear kept me quiet. Fear of confirming that my worst nightmare was real. So instead, I pretended everything was fine and that I hadn't noticed anything. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, went to work, came home, listened to her daily rundown with a smile, even as I scanned her face for any sign of deception. The tension in me built day by day, a knot tightening in my chest. I felt like I was living with a stranger. Even the kids sensed something. Emily asked me one night while I tucked her in, "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" She seemed sad. I brushed a strand of her soft brown hair behind her ear and forced a reassuring smile. "She's okay, sweetie. Just a little tired lately. You know how moms are, always busy." Emily accepted that answer and snuggled into her blankets, but I walked out of her room feeling like a fraud. My little girl could tell something was wrong, and here I was, lying to her that everything was all right. I knew I had to find the truth. If my marriage was crumbling under my nose, I needed to know why. Little did I realize just how devastating that truth would be, and how it would set me on a path I never imagined taking. Chapter 2. Unintentional Exposure. It was a Thursday in early spring when my growing suspicions turned into undeniable proof. I remember the day vividly, one of those crisp March afternoons where the chill was just starting to give way to hints of warmth. That morning at work, I had been in back-to-back meetings. By lunchtime, I was drained and craving some fresh air. I stepped outside the plant for a quick break and saw a text on my phone. Meeting at 3 p.m. canceled. Our regional manager had an emergency and had to reschedule our afternoon meeting. This meant I could wrap up early. Ordinarily, I'd use the unexpected free time to catch up on paperwork, but my mind immediately drifted to home. Maybe I could surprise Michelle and the kids by picking them up from school, or stop by the grocery store and grab ingredients to cook a nice dinner. It had been a while since we had a relaxed family meal on a weekday. A spontaneous urge nudged me. Go home now, see what Michelle is up to. I couldn't explain why that was my first thought. Maybe a part of me was looking for reassurance that everything was fine at home. Or maybe that gut feeling I'd been suppressing pushed me to seize this rare midday freedom to confirm or dispel my fears. I told my supervisor I was taking off early, hopped into my sedan, and started the half-hour drive back to our neighborhood. As I navigated the suburban streets, I noticed my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. My heart thumped with an anxious mix of hope and dread. I tried to convince myself that I'd find nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps Michelle would be playing with Leo or tidying up the house, and I'd feel foolish for ever doubting her. But if she was up to something, this was my chance to catch a glimpse of it. Turning onto our street, I instinctively slowed the car and cut the engine a few houses away from ours, coasting to a stop by the curb. I'm not sure what I expected to find, but I suddenly felt the need to approach quietly. I stepped out of the car and noticed Peter's navy blue BMW parked along the opposite curb, about 2 houses down from mine. I recognized the license plate instantly, PR37. Peter had a vanity plate with his initials. My stomach dropped. Peter's car? Here? At this hour? He was supposed to be at work downtown, and I hadn't heard anything about him coming over today. A rush of adrenaline surged through me. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he had a day off or an appointment nearby and decided to visit Michelle and the kids. But why wouldn't either of them mention it to me? He usually texted if he was coming by. And if he was visiting, where were the kids? Emily would still be in school at this hour, and Leo had preschool until 3 on Thursdays. That left just Michelle at home. The scenario I had tried not to imagine was now glaring me in the face. I felt anger and panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm and think clearly. If I barged in through the front door, they'd hear me immediately. I didn't want to give them any chance to cover their tracks or deny what might be happening. I needed to know for sure. Quietly, I walked around the side of the house, making my way toward the backyard gate. Years ago, I had installed a latch on the gate that opened silently to avoid waking the baby when I came home late. Now that foresight was about to pay off. I eased the gate open without a sound and stepped onto our back lawn. The curtains in the living room were partially drawn, but through the gap I could see movement, a shadow crossing in front of the window. I crept up to the house, careful to stay on the grass to muffle my footsteps, and positioned myself just below the living room window. At first, I only heard muffled voices. I edged closer, until I was right under the open window, hidden behind one of our large rose bushes. Taking a steadying breath, I tilted my head just enough to peek inside through the corner of the pane. What I saw made my heart lurch. There was Michelle sitting on the sofa, and next to her was Peter. They weren't doing anything overtly intimate at that exact moment, no kissing or touching right then, but the way they sat told a story. Their bodies were angled toward each other, knees almost touching. Michelle's hand rested on Peter's knee in a way that was far too familiar for mere friends. They both looked flushed, as if they'd been, well, busy. Michelle's usually tidy hair was a bit messy, and I could see that her blouse was misbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of the lacy bra I recognized from her new purchases. I realized with a fresh wave of fury and hurt that this likely meant exactly what it looked like. There had been more than just talking going on before now. My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. I fought the urge to burst through the window and knock Peter flat, but I knew I needed more than just my rage to confront them. I needed to hear it, words that I couldn't unhear, proof that could never be explained away. So I stayed put, heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. As I strained to catch their voices, they became clearer. Michelle was speaking, her tone low and anxious. "We have to be careful," she was saying, her hand squeezing Peter's knee. "If Adam finds out, it would destroy him. And the kids," she choked up for a second. "I can't even imagine what this would do to our family." Peter reached over and took her hand in his. I felt a white-hot flash of betrayal seeing his fingers entwine with hers. This was my best friend comforting my wife about their affair, an image I will never forget. He spoke softly. "I know, I feel guilty too. But I just can't stop, Michelle. I've never felt like this about anyone. Not even—" He trailed off, and I wondered if he was about to mention his ex-fiancée, but he didn't finish that thought. Instead, he sighed. "We'll figure something out, okay? I just hate that we have to hide like this." Michelle leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Maybe, maybe after some time, we can find a way to be together openly, she said, her voice trembling. But I can't lose my children. No matter what, the kids come first for me. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. The kids come first? If she truly cared about the kids, how could she do this to their father? To our family? My hands curled into fists as I continued to listen. I know, Peter replied. He kissed the top of her head gently. My stomach churned at the sight. We have to take things slow. I'll talk to him, when the time is right. Maybe he doesn't ever have to find out. I don't want to hurt him either. He's my friend, but… Michelle lifted her head then, a flash of fear in her eyes. No, Peter, we can't tell him. Not now, not… I can't bear the thought of how much it would hurt him. He's a good man, a good husband and father. I never wanted to do this to him, I swear. Her voice cracked, and unbelievably, tears glistened on her cheeks. It just happened. I never planned to fall in love with you. My breath caught in my throat. In love. She said she was in love with him. In that moment, something inside me shattered. There it was, the confirmation of the emotional affair as well as the physical one. This wasn't a fleeting fling or a one-time mistake. She had given her heart to him. And he to her, apparently. Peter pulled her into a hug. Hey, he whispered, brushing her hair back from her face. I love you too. We'll get through this. Just stick with me. I felt like I might vomit right there in the hydrangeas. My body shook with equal parts devastation and rage. Each word I heard was a dagger, twisting deeper. But through the whirlwind of emotions, a cold, calculating part of my mind kicked in. This is evidence. Actual words confirming the affair. My phone was in my hand before I fully realized it, and I hit the record button, holding it up carefully just below the windowsill. I captured a few seconds of their voices, enough to clearly hear Michelle say, I never planned to fall in love with you, and Peter responding, I love you too. That was all I needed for now. I ended the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Inside, the conversation continued, but I had heard enough. I was trembling, and I didn't trust myself to stay hidden much longer without doing something rash. As gently as I could, I backed away from the window. I moved slowly across the yard to the gate, my breath shallow and quiet. Only when I was out of the backyard and around the side of the house did I let myself breathe deeply again. I felt tears of anger and heartbreak sting my eyes as I realized the full weight of what I'd just witnessed. My wife and my best friend were having an affair, one significant enough that they spoke of being in love and possibly finding a way to be together. I crept back to my car, which was still parked quietly down the street. As I sat behind the wheel, I saw the front door of my house open. From my vantage point, I could partially see Michelle standing in the doorway, hugging Peter as he prepared to leave. They shared a quick, furtive kiss, like a married couple would, comfortable and routine, and then he stepped off the porch. Michelle glanced around the street, probably to make sure no one was watching, then gave him a little wave and closed the door. Peter walked to his car, a slight spring in his step. I sank lower in my seat, ensuring I was hidden behind a neighbor's hedge. He drove right past me, oblivious to my presence. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, waiting until his BMW disappeared around the corner. Only then did I start my car, hands shaking, and drove around the block to approach my house as if I were just arriving normally from work. I pulled into the driveway and took a moment to compose myself. I wiped my face with my palms. They came away damp. I hadn't even realized I'd been crying. With a deep breath, I practiced a neutral expression in the rearview mirror. It felt almost impossible. My face wanted to contort with hurt and fury. But I managed something close to normal. Walking in the front door, I forced cheerfulness into my voice. Hey, Shell! I'm home early! I called out using my pet name for her, hoping my tone didn't betray me. My heart was pounding with adrenaline and anguish, but I knew I had to act natural. Michelle emerged from the kitchen, and my chest constricted at the sight of her. She looked lovely and so normal, hair smoothed back into a ponytail, a light flush on her cheeks. To think that minutes ago she was in another man's arms. I felt a surge of anger and had to clench my jaw to suppress it. Adam, this is a surprise, she said with a bright, seemingly genuine smile. If I hadn't just seen what I saw, I would have thought that smile meant she was happy to see me. How could she act like nothing was wrong? She walked up and gave me a peck on the lips. I stiffened involuntarily at her touch, and for a split second I worried she noticed. But if she did, she didn't show it. Yeah, my meeting got canceled, I said evenly, setting my work bag down. Thought I'd take off early, maybe pick up the kids from school so we could all hang out. That sounds great, she replied. There was a slight quiver in her voice and she blinked a bit too rapidly, which I might not have caught if I wasn't scrutinizing her every move. Was that guilt I saw in her eyes? Or was I imagining it? I would have cleaned up a bit if I knew you were coming, she continued, looking around the living room. I followed her gaze. The sofa cushions were a bit askew, no doubt from the two of them sitting close, and there on the coffee table was an open bottle of wine, two glasses next to it, each with a little red wine remaining at the bottom. My stomach churned at the sight. They'd been drinking wine in the middle of the day together. It looked like a romantic rendezvous, not some friendly visit. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile down. I pointed at the bottle and raised an eyebrow, trying to sound merely curious. Afternoon drinks? Michelle flushed, a touch of panic in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. Oh, that. Yeah, I was just. She faltered, and in that pause I felt my heart twist. My wife, who used to always be honest to a fault, was scrambling to lie to my face. She regrouped and gave a shaky laugh. I had a video call with an old college friend earlier, and we each had a glass of wine for old time's sake. Silly, right? I guess I forgot to tidy up after. Video call and both having wine? It was the kind of explanation that might sound plausible if I hadn't known the truth. I simply nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I could taste iron from how hard I was biting the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming at her. An awkward silence hung between us for a moment. Michelle fiddled with a dish towel she had draped over her shoulder, her eyes avoiding mine. I should, clean this up, she murmured, reaching for the glasses. I gently caught her wrist before I could think better of it. I had never been the type to grab or hurt her, and I made sure my touch was light. I just needed to see her eyes. Michelle, I said, and my voice came out more strained than I'd liked. Her eyes met mine, and I saw it clearly now. Guilt, fear, and something like sorrow swirling in those green irises. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. For a heartbeat, I almost broke right then and there. I nearly asked her, "Why? How could you do this?" My throat tightened with the pressure of unspoken questions and accusations, but some last shred of caution held me back. If I confronted her now, I'd blow any chance of a calculated response. I still needed time to figure out what to do, how to handle this so that I didn't lose everything. So I let her go, physically and verbally. Nothing, it's okay, I lied, releasing her wrist gently. Let's not worry about it. We can clean up later. Come on, we'll pick up the kids together. She looked at me, surprised by my sudden change in demeanor. Perhaps she expected suspicion or more questions, but I gave her a small, weary smile. It's been a long day for both of us, I added half-truthfully. Some family time will do us good. Michelle nodded slowly, relief washing over her face. You're right, she said softly. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a hug. I closed my eyes, returning the embrace mechanically. She felt familiar and yet like a stranger in my arms. I caught a whiff of her perfume mixed with, was that Peter's cologne? Rage threatened to surge again, but I beat it back down. We pulled apart and she went to grab her purse and keys. I took a moment to steady myself, drawing in a long breath and exhaling quietly. I had done it. I had proof of their betrayal, and I had managed not to explode on the spot. But the hardest part was yet to come. I would have to keep this terrible secret to myself and act as though everything was normal until I could decide my next move. One thing was certain as I followed my wife out to the car to go get our children. Nothing about our life was normal anymore. Chapter 3. Deep Wound. For the rest of that day, and many days after, I felt like I was living in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. On the surface, I went through the motions of ordinary life. Underneath, I was a storm of emotions barely held in check. I remember driving to pick up Emily and Leo from school with Michelle sitting beside me in the passenger seat, her hands folded on her lap. She gazed out the window and occasionally offered some comment about how Emily might have done on her spelling test or what Leo drew in class that day. I responded where appropriate, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying every word I'd overheard, every lie she'd told me. I stole glances at her when she wasn't looking. This woman I thought I knew so well. How long had she been deceiving me? How could I have missed it? In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the kids getting into the car, excited to see me. I forced a smile, answering their chatter about their day, and tried to act normal. It took every ounce of willpower not to let my fury and hurt spill over in front of them. That evening was excruciating. We sat around the dinner table eating the pizza I'd picked up, with the kids happily talking about school projects and cartoons. Michelle chimed in with questions and laughter at all the right moments, playing the role of loving mom, as if nothing at all was amiss. I marveled at her composure. I barely got a bite down, my appetite replaced by a nauseating swirl of betrayal and anger. More than once, I caught myself staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman across the table, the caring mother of my children, the person who used to hold my hand during scary movies and kiss me goodnight every day, with the woman who just hours ago confessed her love to my best friend. Each time our eyes met, she quickly looked away, like she was afraid of what she might see in my expression. Did she suspect something? Or was it just her own guilty conscience making it hard for her to meet my gaze? She fidgeted often, refilling water glasses that were still half full, over-enthusiastically complimenting Emily on eating her veggies, things like that. In hindsight, I think she was nervous. Maybe my surprise early arrival had put her on edge. Perhaps she and Peter had considered the possibility that I might have seen or heard something. Or maybe she was simply wrestling with her own guilt, aware that she was living a double life under the same roof as me. That night, after getting the kids to bed with their usual stories and kisses, I retreated to the garage, telling Michelle I needed to tinker with the car. In reality, I just needed a place to be alone. As soon as the door closed behind me, I leaned against the hood of my sedan and finally let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. Hot tears blurred my vision, and before I knew it, I was sobbing, huge, gut-wrenching sobs that echoed in the small space. I muffled myself with my arm, biting down on my sleeve to keep quiet. I didn't want her to hear me through the door. This was my private breakdown, and I clung to it like a shameful secret. How could she do this? How could they do this? My best friend and my wife. It was a double betrayal so deep I felt like I might drown in it. I don't know how long I sat there in the garage, but by the time I emerged, my eyes were dry and I felt hollowed out. It was late. The house was silent. I peeked in on the kids. Both were fast asleep, the soft sounds of their breathing reminding me why I needed to keep it together. Whatever happened between me and Michelle, I had to protect Emily and Leo. They were innocent in all this, and they adored their mother. No matter how furious I was with her, I didn't want them to suffer more than they had to. When I walked into our bedroom, Michelle was already in bed, the lights off. I could make out her silhouette under the blankets facing away from my side. Normally, I might have kissed her goodnight or whispered something sweet as I climbed in. That night, I silently changed into my pajamas and lay down stiffly, leaving a few inches of distance between us. The emotional gap felt like a chasm. I could smell her shampoo, and in another time, that would have been comforting. Now it just made me clench my fists under the covers, remembering how close her head was to Peter's chest that afternoon. I wondered if she was really asleep or just pretending. Her breathing was a little too even, too controlled. If she was awake, she didn't speak, and neither did I. Eventually, sheer emotional exhaustion must have pulled me into a dark, dreamless sleep. In the days that followed, I wavered between raw pain and a cold, calculating resolve. At work the next morning, I was a wreck, barely able to focus during a team briefing. My colleague Mike even asked if I was feeling all right. I lied and said I hadn't slept well, which was technically true. The truth, I just discovered my wife is cheating on me with my best friend, was too surreal and humiliating to speak aloud. Instead, I buried myself in tasks, figuring it was better to stay busy than let my mind run wild. The few times I encountered Peter at work, we didn't work at the same company, but our industries overlapped, and we'd occasionally cross paths at networking events or lunch spots downtown. I was thankfully spared direct contact with him. I did see an email thread that included his name. His firm was consulting on a project with a vendor of ours. Normally, I might shoot him a message to grab lunch upon noticing he was involved, but now the sight of his name on my screen just made me shut my laptop in anger. I wondered if he was feeling any guilt at all. Probably not enough to stop given what I heard. The thought of confronting him tempted me, but I knew it was premature. If I let on that I knew he'd warn Michelle or vice versa, and they'd close ranks. They might even twist the narrative, try to paint me as the bad guy somehow. I couldn't give them that chance. At home, I maintained a facade of normalcy with Oscar-worthy performance. Mornings were the hardest. Waking up and remembering the reality of my situation hit me like a punch each time. But I'd get the kids ready, down my coffee, and head out the door with a kiss on Michelle's cheek, as though we were the happy couple we'd always been. Every time I did that, a part of me screamed. I wasn't kissing the woman I thought I knew. I was kissing a stranger wearing my wife's face. Strangely, acting normal became easier as I turned it into a mission. It was like slipping on a mask every day. Underneath, I was gathering my strength, planning my next steps. I had decided almost immediately that I wouldn't simply confront them in a burst of anger. That would be satisfying in the short term. Sure, I could shout, rage, maybe throw a punch or two at Peter. But then what? I'd be left with a broken marriage, possibly a police call if things got out of hand, and no real justice served. They could attempt to salvage their reputation, maybe even continue their relationship openly after the dust settled. No, an explosive confrontation alone would be too easy for them. They had not only betrayed me, they had jeopardized the stability of my children's home. The image of my sweet little Emily and boisterous Leo having to split time between parents, or worse, being under the care of a man like Peter if Michelle chose him, well, it terrified and enraged me. I needed to protect my kids and ensure that Michelle's selfish choices didn't hurt them more than necessary. That meant if our marriage was going to end, I had to be the one in control of how it ended. Michigan is a no-fault divorce state. I knew that much from a coworker who had gone through a split. But I also knew that evidence of infidelity could still sway things like child custody or the division of assets in some cases, especially if marital funds were misused or the children's well-being was affected. If I was going to confront them, I wanted every advantage on my side, legally, morally, socially. I wanted to leave no room for them to wriggle out of the consequences of what they'd done. So I began to plan. The first step was to gather evidence of the affair. I already had a short audio recording, but I needed more solid proof. Proof that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind of what they'd done. If it came down to a court battle, I wanted to be armed to the teeth. And beyond that, a darker part of me admitted, I wanted to be able to throw this evidence in their faces and in the faces of anyone who sympathized with them. I envisioned exposing them in front of family, friends, maybe even colleagues, so that their betrayal would be out in the open. The humiliation they'd put me through in private, I would return to them tenfold in public. It was a vindictive thought, to be sure, and perhaps not my proudest. But in the raw aftermath of heartbreak, all I could think about was making them pay for the pain they caused. Chapter 4. Skillful Preparation. Late one night, about a week after I'd discovered the affair, I found myself unable to sleep. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michelle, who seemed to be sleeping soundly, no guilt-induced insomnia for her, apparently, and went downstairs to the kitchen. With a notebook and pen meant for jotting grocery lists, I started outlining a plan in messy handwriting by the light over the stove. My hands shook slightly as I wrote out the steps. Gather evidence of the affair. Photos, texts, emails, recordings, whatever I can get. Dig into Peter's life. Find any secrets or wrongdoing, especially anything illegal or against his company's policies. Consult a lawyer discreetly. Get advice on divorce and custody. Make sure I do this right. Plan the confrontation exposure. Choose the time and place for maximum impact. Execute. No turning back. Seeing the steps laid out both frightened and steeled me. This was really happening. I was preparing to go to war against the two people I had loved and trusted most. Step 1, gathering evidence of the affair, was tricky but doable. I knew I might not catch them in person again easily without raising suspicion, so I decided to use technology. The day after I overheard them, I had discreetly purchased a small voice-activated recorder from an electronics store. It was tiny, no larger than a USB stick. One afternoon, when Michelle was out picking up the kids, I slipped into our bedroom and carefully taped the device under the bed near her side, where it could likely pick up any conversations in the room. A part of me felt sick doing this, planting a bug in my own home, but I reminded myself it was for a good reason. If Peter ever came over while I wasn't home, or if they spoke by phone in the bedroom, I'd have it recorded. I also started keeping a close eye on our shared computer and the iPad the kids sometimes used, which Michelle also used occasionally. I knew Michelle might be cautious, but most people slip up digitally at some point. Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I hit a jackpot of sorts. Michelle had logged into her email on the iPad and forgotten to log out. Late at night, after she was asleep, I opened it and her inbox was right there. My hands trembled as I navigated through her emails. Most were innocent: school newsletters, notes from her mom, shopping receipts. But then I found a folder in her email app labeled Recipes. It struck me as odd because she already had a recipe app she used separately. When I clicked it, I discovered a string of emails between her and Peter. They had used code words and innocuous titles to hide their tracks. The emails themselves read like love letters. They talked about mundane daily stuff at first glance, but with a romantic undertone that you wouldn't expect between just friends. One was about that great new restaurant downtown and making plans to take the kids to the park. But reading between the lines and seeing the heart emoji he signed off with, it was clear they'd used some kind of agreed cover language. And then there were photos. In one email thread, as I scrolled, I suddenly saw a picture of Michelle, smiling in a way that was meant for a lover, not for a camera. Her head tilted, a bit of her cleavage showing in a low-cut top, the kind of photo she'd never sent me out of the blue. Attached to another email was a shirtless gym selfie of Peter with a goofy grin. The sight of it made my blood boil and my stomach turn simultaneously. I forwarded all those emails to a new account I'd made for myself, and then deleted the sent messages record. Next, I turned to her text messages. She was careful, often deleting threads, but phone records and some app data don't lie. I installed a phone monitoring app that week, one meant for parents to watch their kids' phone use. It was a bit of a moral gray area to use it on my spouse, but again, I no longer cared. Through it, I recovered fragments of deleted text between her and a number I recognized as Peter's. The texts ranged from short, casual check-ins to more explicit ones that made me feel like I was reading something scalding. In one, from about 2 months before I found out, she had written, "I can't stop thinking about this afternoon. Being in your arms felt so right, even though I know it's wrong." His response? "You don't know how happy I am you came over. I've wanted this for so long." There it was, evidence the affair had been physical for a while, possibly months. I archived everything, making sure it was saved in multiple places. My new email, a USB drive I'd hidden in my office at work, and even printed hard copies of the most damning pieces which I stashed in a locked file cabinet in the garage. The more I uncovered, the more my hurt transformed into determination. It still hurt like hell. Don't get me wrong. Every time I read one of their lovey-dovey exchanges or looked at those pictures, it was like ripping the wound open anew. But it also steeled my resolve to make them face the consequences. Step 2, digging into Peter's life, was something I approached with equal parts dread and anticipation. On one hand, this was a man I had trusted, a friend I'd known for years. Snooping into his affairs felt alien and dirty. On the other hand, that same friend had been more than willing to sneak around with my wife, so my sympathy for him had effectively evaporated. I started with what I knew. Peter was a financial consultant, but he often talked about his personal investments and side projects. He owned a rental property, traded stocks aggressively, and had once mentioned a cryptocurrency venture. Frankly, none of that sounded illegal in and of itself, but I also recalled a night about a year ago when we'd had a few too many beers by my fire pit. He got a bit loose-lipped about some tricks he used to save money on taxes. At the time, I'd laughed it off as him boasting about normal tax loopholes. Now I wondered if there was more to it. One evening, when I knew Peter was out of town on business, I learned about the trip through Michelle, who casually mentioned that Peter was flying to Atlanta for a week. No doubt they coordinated that knowledge for their meetups too. I decided to take a bold step. Peter had given me a key to his condo downtown years ago in case of emergencies or to water his plants when he traveled. I'd only used it a couple of times. Now, I retrieved that key from my desk drawer and drove to his place under cover of darkness, telling Michelle I had to handle a late call at work. My heart pounded with the fear of getting caught as I parked and entered his building. Thankfully, the front desk was empty at that hour, and I knew the security code to the elevator. He'd shared it with me in the past. Inside his modern, minimalist condo, the air smelled like his cologne, and the takeout containers on the counter indicated he'd left in a hurry. I went straight to his home office. I had roughly an hour before Michelle might start wondering about me, so I worked quickly. Rifling through someone's personal files felt surreal, but I was methodical. In his desk drawers, I found exactly what I suspected might be there: financial documents. Some looked normal, but others looked decidedly problematic. There were statements from offshore bank accounts I didn't know he had, printouts of complicated transactions through shell companies. One folder contained a ledger with handwritten notes that suggested he was funneling money out of his firm's accounts somehow. I snapped photos of every suspicious document with my phone. I also noticed a USB flash drive plugged into a docking station on his desk. On a hunch, I pocketed it, praying he wouldn't notice it missing immediately. I would return it soon after copying the data. I just didn't have time to sift through it there. Before leaving, I did a quick sweep for anything else, maybe personal notes or, hell, evidence of the affair from his side. On his nightstand, I found a couple of Polaroids of him with a woman who was definitely not Michelle, a young blonde I didn't recognize. So he was cheating not just with my wife, but possibly others too? Or perhaps those were old photos? I took a picture of those as well, in case they might be relevant. It painted a picture of a man with plenty of secrets. I locked up and slipped back out into the night, heart hammering but feeling like I'd obtained something worthwhile. Over the next couple of days, using my work laptop at off hours, I examined what was on the USB drive and the photos I'd taken. The drive was another goldmine of incriminating data. It contained spreadsheets from his consulting firm's financials and what looked like evidence of embezzlement. My hands shook with excitement and disbelief as I realized what I had. Peter was skimming money, likely thinking himself too clever to be caught. There were records of payments made to fake vendors that routed back to his accounts, emails where he used pseudonyms to manage those shell companies, and even scans of signed documents authorizing transactions that I suspected his bosses would never have approved had they known the truth. This was beyond personal now. This was criminal. And ironically, by snooping, I too was doing something illegal, illegally entering his home and taking his private information. But I was careful to cover my tracks and rationalized it as necessary for the greater good and my own justice. By the time I compiled everything, I had a solid dossier on both of them. Michelle's betrayal and Peter's affair with her were documented through emails, texts, and the damning audio recording I had from that day. Peter's misdeeds at work were evidenced by the documents and files I'd gathered. I even found out the blonde in the Polaroids was an assistant at his company who had left abruptly a few months prior. I surmised possibly paid off or scared into silence after an office fling. The man was living a life of deception on multiple fronts. Step 3 was consulting a lawyer, which I did quietly. I reached out to a divorce attorney in downtown Detroit, someone with a reputation for being aggressive and discreet. In our meeting, which I scheduled during a long lunch break from work, I laid out the basics. My wife was cheating, I had evidence, and I was concerned about protecting my kids and assets. I withheld specifics about Peter's crimes for the moment, just saying I had reason to believe the other man had serious issues that might become relevant. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise, advised me on the divorce process. Michigan's no fault, she confirmed, but judges can consider misconduct when it comes to things like custody or dividing property. Adultery can impact alimony awards too, and given that I'd likely be the one paying if any were awarded, since I earned and she was a homemaker, proof of infidelity could save me from that. For custody, she said the courts only care about the best interest of the children. But if I could show that Michelle's affair was in some way detrimental to the kids or indicative of poor judgment, like if she ever neglected them to meet him, for example, it might sway things. I admitted I didn't think she was a bad mother in general, but that I felt the kids were better off with me full-time given what she'd done. It wasn't the strongest argument on its own. Plenty of good mothers have affairs and still get shared custody. Denise suggested that a judge might see her favorably as a stay-at-home mom unless there was something more. That something more could be the character of the man she cheated with. If he was, say, a criminal or someone unstable, having him in her life could indeed be a factor. I remember the slight smile on my face as I realized I had just the ammo needed for that. Peter's impending downfall could indirectly ensure Michelle loses favor in custody talks if she still aligned herself with him. Before I left, I gave Denise a hypothetical. If someone had evidence of criminal activity by the spouse's lover, should they turn that over to authorities before the divorce, or wait? She raised an eyebrow, undoubtedly curious about what I was, implying her answer was that it's a personal decision, but if it were her case, she might hold it as a card to play at the right moment unless public safety was at immediate risk. I thanked her and left with a mix of anxiety and anticipation swirling in my gut. Things were lining up. Step 4, planning the confrontation, took some creativity. I wanted a scenario where both Michelle and Peter would be present, and where important others would be there to witness. I contemplated doing it at a family gathering, maybe a holiday or a planned get-together. As luck would have it, I didn't have to wait long for an opportunity. One of our mutual friends, James, was planning a big spring barbecue at his place in May, something of an annual tradition among our neighborhood friends and some of my coworkers. It was like a block party, but a bit bigger, with people bringing their families and even a few colleagues from work to mingle. Peter was invited. He and James were friends too through me. And of course Michelle and I were going, along with the kids. The event was a perfect stage. Casual, plenty of people around, a mix of personal and professional circles. I decided that would be the day I sprang the trap. It gave me roughly a month and a half to get everything in order, which was good because I still needed to fine-tune my plan and gather the nerve to execute it. In that time, I continued to keep up the facade at home. It was the strangest period of my life, knowing what I knew and still playing the loving husband. I wasn't overly affectionate, some part of me couldn't stomach that, but I also tried not to be cold. I aimed for normalcy. We talked about the kids, we watched a family movie on Fridays, we even went out to dinner a couple of times with friends, including incredibly Peter once in a group setting. That night was surreal. Sitting across the table at a restaurant from the two of them while they acted as if nothing was amiss. I caught a few fleeting looks between them that made my skin crawl, but for the most part they kept it well under wraps. If anything, they were a bit more distant in public than usual, likely to avoid suspicion. I wondered if they were meeting at all during those weeks, or if the scare of my near catch had slowed them down. In any case, I didn't care. I had all I needed from them already. On the surface, I might have appeared calmer to Michelle. She even commented a week before the barbecue saying, "You seem to be in better spirits these days. I was worried you were really stressed with work or something." I had just shrugged and said I was managing. What I really was resolved. The hurt hadn't diminished. If anything, it was pressed down under a layer of purpose. But I knew in a short time, I'd be releasing it all. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. As I got dressed that morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. I hardly recognized the man staring back. He looked stern, older than his 35 years, with hardened eyes. I straightened my shirt, thinking of the role I had to play one last time before I stripped everything bare. It was time to set the final act into motion. Chapter 5. The Trap Sprung. The May sun was shining brightly as we arrived at James's backyard barbecue that afternoon. The smell of charcoal and grilling burgers mixed with the lilac scent of late spring. Children were already running around on the grass, shrieking and laughing, while adults gathered in clusters with drinks in hand. It was a picture-perfect suburban gathering, exactly the kind of wholesome event where no one would expect any drama. I could feel my heart pounding harder with each step I took toward the crowd, but outwardly, I tried to appear at ease. I carried a cooler of drinks in one hand and held Leo's hand with the other, while Emily skipped ahead to find her friends. Michelle walked beside me, a casserole dish for the potluck cradled in her arms. I glanced at her from the corner of my eye. She looked a bit tense, no doubt worried about seeing Peter here. She hadn't mentioned him specifically, but I knew he'd be coming. He never missed James's barbecues. For my part, I had been careful not to bring him up either, keeping things between us cordial but minimal over the past several weeks. Today I had to act like nothing was wrong until the moment I chose to reveal everything. James greeted us with a broad grin and a one-armed hug, his other hand holding a spatula. "Adam, Shelley, glad you guys could make it," he said warmly. "The kids are over by the swing set and drinks are up on the deck. Make yourselves at home." We thanked him and I handed off the cooler. As we wandered further into the yard, a few more friends and neighbors came up to chat. It was all casual smiles and small talk, about the weather, about sports, about how fast our kids were growing. I responded automatically, but my eyes were subtly scanning for Peter. I spotted him after a few minutes over by the picnic table where the food was laid out. He was talking to our neighbor, Tom, balancing a paper plate full of chips and a beer bottle in his hands. When he noticed me looking, he raised the beer in a half wave, a friendly gesture as if nothing at all was amiss between us. He had no idea what was coming. I gave a tight smile and waved back, forcing myself not to glare. Michelle had tensed up beside me when she saw him. I could feel it in the way she paused, cutting across the lawn, but she quickly composed herself and murmured, "I'm going to go set this down," lifting the casserole slightly. Without waiting for my response, she headed toward the food table, toward Peter. I watched as she approached him. They exchanged what looked like an awkward hello. At least they had the decency to not embrace or anything in public. Peter looked a touch nervous, glancing around, perhaps to see if I was nearby. I busied myself in conversation with one of my coworkers who was there, pretending to be absorbed, all the while keeping them in my peripheral vision. They spoke only briefly before joining separate groups of friends, so they were playing it cool. Good. I felt a hand on my shoulder, snapping me out of my focus. It was my colleague, Dan, offering me a cold beer. I accepted it with a smile and took a long swig, hoping the liquid courage would steady my nerves. I wasn't much of a drinker typically, but today a single beer wouldn't hurt. I needed just enough to take the edge off, not enough to cloud my mind. The next hour passed in a strange blur. I mingled, I laughed at half-heard jokes, and even tossed a football with some of the kids and other dads for a bit. All the while, the folder with printed evidence in my car and the thumb drive in my pocket felt like burning weights. I had brought everything I might need. Copies of Peter's shady financial records, printed emails and photos of the affair, even a portable Bluetooth speaker in case I decided to play the incriminating audio from my phone. I was nothing if not prepared. As the afternoon sun began to dip slightly and people settled down with plates of food, I knew it was time. The nervousness that had been fluttering in my stomach all day transformed into a steely resolve. This was it. My moment. I walked over to the patio deck where James was flipping the last of the burgers and clearing his throat to make an announcement, likely about food being ready. I touched his arm lightly and murmured, "Hey, mind if I say something first? It's important." James looked curious but nodded, stepping back and letting me take the spot at the head of the deck. I cleared my throat and raised my voice just a notch to carry over the clink of glasses and chatter. "Hey everyone," I began, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Can I have your attention for a minute?" Slowly, the buzz of conversation died down. About 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me, including those of Michelle and Peter. I saw Michelle freeze in the middle of pouring lemonade for one of the kids. Peter was leaning against the table, a burger in hand. He lowered it, his expression turning wary. I forced a cordial smile. My heart was hammering, but I projected my voice steadily. "First, I just want to say thanks to James and Linda for hosting this amazing barbecue. It's always great to get everyone together like this." There were nods and a few murmurs of agreement. I could see some smiles. They likely expected me to toast our gracious hosts or something similarly benign, if only they knew. James grinned and waved modestly. I caught his eye and gave a slight nod, almost like an apology for what I was about to do at his family-friendly event. I continued, my tone shifting to something more serious. Actually, I have something on my mind that I need to share with you all. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's important. A hush fell. People exchanged puzzled glances. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Michelle set down the pitcher of lemonade, staring at me, her face growing pale. Peter stood up straighter, brow furrowing. I locked eyes with Peter from across the yard. It's about a betrayal, I said loudly, the words slicing through the quiet backyard. The air seemed to go still. A betrayal by someone I considered my closest friend. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Peter's face flushed red. Adam, he called out, an uneasy chuckle in his voice. What are you talking about, man? My gaze did not waver. My calmness at that moment surprised even me. I'm talking about you, Peter, I stated clearly. An audible gasp came from someone, maybe Linda, James's wife. Peter set his plate down slowly. Me? What is this? He tried to laugh as if I were joking, but it came out strangled. He glanced around at the others, attempting a charming smile that faltered under the weight of attention. Is this some kind of prank? I shook my head and pulled the thumb drive from my pocket, holding it up between my fingers for all to see. No prank. This drive contains copies of financial records and emails, evidence of serious financial misconduct committed by Peter Reynolds. Murmurs swept through the crowd. A couple of people looked at Peter in shock. I saw one of his colleagues who had come with him take a step back and stare. Michelle's hands flew to her mouth. I could see her eyes wide above her fingers. Peter's expression turned from nervous to alarmed. What the hell are you talking about? He snapped, a bit of panic cracking his voice. This is absurd. Is it? I shot back. My voice grew stronger, fueled by months of anger. You've been embezzling funds from your firm and defrauding clients for years, Peter. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, fake vendor invoices, shell companies. Ring any bells? There was a collective gasp. Peter's colleague, a man named Raj, stepped forward, looking stunned. Peter, is this true? He asked, clearly hoping it wasn't. Others were whispering in disbelief. Peter's face was now a sheen of sweat. This is nonsense. Adam, how could you? He looked around desperately. He's making this up. He has no proof. I was ready for that. I held up a folder I had placed on the deck rail. No proof? I have copies right here of transaction records showing money going into PR Consulting LLC, a shell corporation you control, Peter, and copies of 2 sets of books you kept. One for your bosses, one with the real numbers. I also have emails from your account, outlining some pretty damning instructions to an assistant about covering your tracks. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice further. He's been stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars under everyone's noses, folks. Peter's eyes bulged. How did you? He stammered, then bit down on his words. In that slip, he had essentially admitted that what I was saying was true, at least to those who caught it. I pressed on relentlessly. And don't worry, I won't keep this a secret. Copies of all of this are being delivered to your company's leadership and the police as we speak. That last part was a tiny fib. I had everything ready to send, though I hadn't dispatched it yet. But I wanted him to feel cornered. Later that night, I did send it all out, making good on the promise. At this point, the atmosphere was tense and stunned. Many were looking at Peter with outrage or bewilderment. One friend whom Peter had lured into some investment looked positively ill, likely thinking about his money. For a moment, the only sounds were the sputtering of the grill and a distant cry of a child at play. Peter's image was crumbling right there, but I wasn't done. I turned my attention to Michelle, who stood frozen by the picnic table, tears brimming in her eyes. My heart wavered seeing her pain, but I reminded myself it was nothing compared to what she'd inflicted on me. I addressed the crowd again, voice tight with the effort to keep control. As if fraud wasn't enough, there's another betrayal here, one a bit more personal. Michelle seemed to snap out of a trance. Adam, she spoke, her voice trembling. Please, don't. Her plea hung in the air and all eyes turned to her now. People started putting 2 and 2 together. Some glances darted between her and Peter. The realization was dawning on their faces. I felt a swell of vindication, edged with heartbreak. I think everyone should know, I said, my tone sorrowful but resolute, that my wife Michelle and my so-called best friend Peter have been having an affair behind my back. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if the world had paused, the moment suspended. Then came the reactions. A collective intake of breath followed by a flurry of exclamations. Oh my God, no way, how could they? Michelle broke down in sobs, covering her face with her hands. One of her friends, Vanessa, rushed to her side, uncertainly putting a hand on her shoulder as Michelle shook with tears. Peter looked like he might be sick. His face was ashen. He opened his mouth, but no words came out this time. James stepped forward, anger and disappointment etched on his face. "Peter, is that true? You and Michelle?" he asked, voice full of disbelief. Peter looked around at the crowd, the friends, neighbors, colleagues, all staring at him like he was some creature they didn't recognize. His mouth worked, but nothing coherent came. Finally, he managed a weak, This is a private matter." "Not anymore," I interjected sharply. My calm was giving way to raw emotion now that the truth was out. "You made it a public matter when you betrayed our whole family and our community's trust." I looked at Michelle then. She had sunk to her knees in the grass, sobbing uncontrollably. Part of me wanted to rush to her, old habits die hard, but I stayed rooted. Instead, I addressed her with words that cut like ice. "How could you, Michelle? In our own home. With him. After everything we've been through." She lifted her tear-streaked face towards me. "Adam, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking." She reached a hand out, beseeching. "Please, let's talk about this privately." I let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "Privately? Now you want things private?" I shook my head, feeling a surge of righteous anger. "I gave you nothing but love and trust for 10 years. Peter," I glared at him. "I treated you like a brother, and the two of you repaid me by sneaking around, lying to my face, and tearing apart my family." Peter stepped forward then, perhaps stupidly trying to salvage something. "Adam, listen, I know you're upset." "Upset?" I echoed, voice rising. My composure was cracking, anger seeping through. "Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. You slept with my wife, Peter. You destroyed my marriage and think you can justify it? And all the while, you were stealing from people who trusted you professionally too. You're a liar, a thief, and a backstabber." My voice echoed in the stunned hush, and I realized my hands were shaking. A few of the men moved subtly closer, as if prepared to intervene if punches started flying. One or two of Michelle's friends were crying too, perhaps out of shock or empathy. Kids were starting to notice the commotion. I saw Emily standing by the swing set with a confused, scared look on her face. The sight of her made me lower my voice. This was not how I wanted my children to find out. I signaled to Dan, who was nearest to her, to take the kids inside or away. He nodded and quickly ushered the cluster of children, including mine, toward the side of the house with the help of another neighbor, telling them they were going to play a game out front. Thank God for that small mercy. Peter by now had run out of bluster. His shoulders sagged and he looked at me with something like despair. "Adam," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm sorry." It sounded hollow and too late, his eyes dropping to the ground. I refused to let any sympathy seep in. "You're going to be a lot more sorry soon," I replied, voice cold. "I meant what I said about the evidence. Your bosses will know by tomorrow what you've done, and law enforcement too. So I'd start consulting a lawyer if I were you, maybe the kind that handles white-collar crime." He blanched at that, realizing the gravity of what he was facing. I had never seen Peter look so small, so defeated. But I felt no pity. As for Michelle, she was still kneeling on the grass, crying. Seeing her like that hurt in a twisted way, but I reminded myself that her wounds were self-inflicted. Vanessa helped her up to her feet, guiding her to a chair. "Adam," Michelle cried out, "please, I know I did a terrible thing, but can we just go home and talk? Please. For the kids' sake, let's not do this here." I looked at her, this woman I had loved for so long, now practically a stranger to me. "For the kids' sake?" I repeated, anger and anguish warring in me. "The time to worry about the kids was before you decided to sleep with Uncle Peter." My voice was flat, drained. "There's nothing left to talk about, Michelle. We're done. I'll be filing for divorce immediately." She sobbed harder at that, burying her face in her hands again. The word divorce seemed to hit her like a physical blow, making her knees buckle. Vanessa and another friend had to steady her. I felt a tightness in my throat but pushed it aside. One of the older neighbors, Mrs. Clarkson, an elegant retired lawyer, cleared her throat in the silence. Her expression was sympathetic but firm. "Adam," she said gently, "I think maybe that's enough for now." Her husband, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. "We understand you're hurting, son, but maybe handle the rest of this in private." There was a murmur of assent from a few others. I realized that, aside from those who were genuinely angry on my behalf, others were simply uncomfortable witnessing this domestic catastrophe play out in front of them. James looked particularly distressed. This was far beyond the scope of what he expected at a barbecue. I suddenly felt a wave of weariness and a touch of regret for blowing it all up so publicly. But another part of me reaffirmed that they deserved this exposure. I took a deep breath and looked around the circle of faces. Friends who weren't sure where to cast their eyes. Acquaintances who would no doubt be gossiping about this for weeks. Coworkers who might look at me with pity at the office now. I hadn't come here to win a popularity contest, though. I'd come to tell the truth and topple the lies. "You're right," I said quietly to Mrs. Clarkson and the others. "I'm sorry for hijacking the party like this, but I couldn't hold it in any longer." My eyes flickered to Michelle, who peeked at me between her fingers, and to Peter, who stood isolated, staring at the ground. They needed to face what they've done. With that, I stepped down from the patio. The crowd parted slightly to let me through. I felt many eyes on me, some full of compassion, others simply stunned. No one quite knew what to do or say next. The festivity was thoroughly dead. The barbecue had turned into something else entirely. As I walked toward where the kids had been whisked away, I heard Michelle call after me faintly, "Adam, please don't leave like this." But I didn't turn back. James caught up with me near the gate of the yard. "Hey man," he said softly, putting a hand on my shoulder. I stopped and looked at him. He looked pained. I'm I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If you need anything, I'm here." I managed a tight smile. "Thanks, James. And I'm sorry for dropping that bomb here. I didn't mean to ruin your barbecue." He shook his head. "Forget the barbecue. I can't believe they'd do that to you. To the kids." He looked genuinely upset on my behalf. I just nodded. My eyes were stinging, but I blinked the tears back. "I'll be fine," I said, not entirely sure if it was true yet. "I need to get my kids home. I'll talk to you later, okay?" "Of course," he said, and then surprised me by pulling me into a quick hug. I patted his back appreciatively, then broke away. I found Emily and Leo waiting with Dan in the front yard. Emily ran up to me, her face worried. "Daddy, what's wrong? Why was Mommy crying?" My heart clenched, but I mustered a reassuring tone. "Hey, kiddo, Mommy just got upset about something I said. Grown-up stuff, okay?" "Everything's going to be all right." I stroked her hair and gently nudged her toward our car parked along the curb. "Let's get you and Leo home and we'll have a talk. Just us." Leo, sensing the somber mood, climbed into his booster seat without his usual protests. I buckled him in and double-checked Emily's seatbelt. Michelle had not followed me out front yet, and I didn't intend to wait. If she wanted a ride home, she could get one from a friend, or with Peter for all I cared. In that moment, I just needed to get out of there. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. A few adults were watching us leave, including Peter, who stood on the lawn looking after my car with a stricken expression, and Michelle, who had just stumbled out through the gate, her face blotchy and desperate. Our eyes met for a brief second through the mirror before I turned the corner. She looked utterly broken. And though a part of me broke at seeing her that way, another part felt the slightest lift, a grim satisfaction that she was starting to feel a fraction of the pain she had caused. The trap had sprung shut. There was no going back now. Chapter 6. Justice Delivered. The drive home from the barbecue was a blur. Emily sniffled in the back seat, upset by the sight of her mother crying, while Leo thankfully dozed off in his car seat, too young to grasp the turmoil. I felt numb, the adrenaline of the confrontation ebbing and leaving behind a heavy fatigue. But I knew there was no time to collapse into despair. I had to keep going, for my kids and for myself. When we pulled into our driveway, I saw that Michelle was not far behind us, riding with Vanessa. They stopped at the curb just as I was ushering the children into the house. Michelle jumped out of the car, her face streaked with tears and panic. "Adam, please," she called, rushing up the path toward me. Vanessa stayed by her car, looking unsure whether to intervene or leave us to it. I held up a hand, stopping Michelle from coming closer to the kids. "Not now," I said quietly but firmly. "The kids don't need to see any more tonight." "Daddy, why is Mommy so sad?" Emily asked, clinging to my side. Her voice quivered. Leo rubbed his eyes, still groggy. I bent down to my daughter's level, speaking gently. "Mommy and Daddy have something very serious to talk about, sweetie. I need you to take Leo inside and play in your room for a little bit, all right? I'll come get you soon." Emily looked between her mom and me, sensing the gravity in my tone. "Okay, Daddy," she whispered. She took Leo's hand and led him inside. I waited until they were through the door before turning back to Michelle. She stood there wringing her hands, eyes red and swollen. "Adam, I'm so sorry," she began, voice cracking. "I know you must hate me. I hate myself for what I did. But please, can we just talk? Scream at me if you want. I deserve it. Just don't shut me out like this." Her plea might have moved me once, but I felt strangely calm and detached. Perhaps I'd shed all my tears already. Talk? I echoed. There's nothing to talk about that I didn't already say. You made your choices, Michelle. She took a shaky step forward. I was stupid and selfish. It was a mistake. A mistake? I cut in, my voice rising despite myself. I took a deep breath, then lowered it again, mindful of the open door behind me. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or overspending on a credit card. You carried on an affair for months at least, with my best friend. That's not a mistake. It's a series of deliberate decisions to lie and betray your family. Each word hit her like a slap. She flinched but pressed on, desperate. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry, Adam. If I could undo it all, I would. It got out of control. I never stopped caring about you, or the kids. I was just... Don't, I said firmly, holding up my hand again. Don't try to explain it away. There's no explanation that justifies what you did. Tears streamed down her face. She looked past me toward the house. What about Emily and Leo? They need their mother. Please, whatever happens between us, don't take me away from them. It was hard not to feel a twinge at that. Despite everything, she was a good mother in many ways, and the kids adored her. But I hardened my heart. She should have thought of that before sleeping with Peter. You should have considered that before putting them in this position, I replied coldly. I won't keep them from you if they want to see you. I'm not cruel. But as far as our marriage goes, this is it. She closed her eyes, a fresh sob shaking her. Vanessa, sensing things were escalating, came up the walk slowly. Maybe Michelle should stay with me tonight, she suggested softly, giving me an imploring look. Give you both some space. I nodded curtly at Vanessa. I think that's best. I don't want any more scenes in front of the kids. Michelle opened her mouth as if to protest, then seemed to deflate. Can I at least say goodnight to them? Please? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, but Emily's distressed face flashed in my mind. Fine, quickly, and keep it together, I agreed. Inside, Michelle knelt and hugged the children tightly, reassuring them through her tears that she loved them and would see them soon. Emily was crying by the end of it, and even Leo seemed upset, his little brows furrowed in confusion. I stood by, arms crossed, jaw clenched, counting the seconds until she would leave. It was heartbreaking to witness, but I kept reminding myself that this scene was of her making. After a few minutes, I gently pulled the kids back. All right, that's enough for tonight. My voice was stiff. Say goodbye to Mommy. Goodbye, Mommy, Emily whimpered, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. I love you. I love you too, baby. So much, Michelle whispered, kissing her forehead. She tried to meet my eyes as she stood up, but I looked away. I escorted her to the door where Vanessa waited. Before she left, Michelle turned to me one last time, her face crumpled. Adam, I know I don't have the right to ask forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life regretting what I did. If there's any chance, any at all, that I could make amends. There isn't, I said, my voice like steel. It was brutal, but I wanted no false hope left between us. Tomorrow, I'll be contacting my lawyer to file for divorce. You'll hear from me about the arrangements. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded weakly. I understand. With that, she walked out into the night with Vanessa by her side. I closed the door, the finality of that sound echoing in the foyer. Inside, I found Emily on the couch, tears still in her eyes. I sat down and gently pulled her close. Why is Mommy leaving? Did I do something wrong? She asked in a tiny voice that nearly shattered my heart. I hugged her tightly. Oh no, sweetie, no, this is not your fault. Mommy and Daddy, we had a big fight. Grown-up problems. I struggled to explain without outright lying or telling her the full truth at that moment. We love you and Leo very much. That will never change. But Mommy and Daddy might need to live in different houses for a while. Emily started sobbing into my shirt at that, and I felt my own eyes burn. I hated that she had to suffer any of this. Will I still see Mommy? She hiccuped. Of course, I assured her, stroking her hair. She's your mommy. You'll see her. It just might be a little different. My voice caught, and I had to pause to steady it. But listen, Em, you and Leo are the most important people in our lives. We're going to make sure you're okay. I promise. It took a long time to get the kids settled that night. I let them both sleep in my bed with me, something we hadn't done since they were toddlers. Emily clung to my arm, and even Leo seemed to sense that they needed extra comfort. Lying there in the dark with a child tucked under each arm, I stared at the ceiling, exhaustion and sorrow washing over me. Yet under it all was a grim sense of vindication. Step one of my plan was done. The truth was out. Now step 2 had to follow, ensuring that I protected these kids and secured justice legally. True to my word, the very next morning I contacted Denise, my lawyer, and set the divorce process in motion. Within a week, papers were drawn up and served to Michelle. She had moved in temporarily with her sister in a neighboring town, which made it easier not having her under the same roof. I communicated with her only through the lawyer or brief need-to-know logistics about the kids. She didn't fight the divorce at all. In fact, in her one message to me via email, she said she would cooperate and only begged that I be fair about seeing the children. I suspected guilt and shame were driving her more than anything now, but I was not feeling particularly generous. I wanted full custody of Emily and Leo. Perhaps it was vengeful, or perhaps I truly believed I was the more stable parent after what she'd done. Either way, I pursued it fiercely. Through my attorney, I made it clear we would be asking the court for me to be the primary custodial parent, with Michelle granted only visitation rights. Given that she'd been a stay-at-home mom, I knew this might be an uphill battle ordinarily. However, I had an ace up my sleeve, evidence of her affair and poor judgment. Michigan might be no fault, but judges could consider moral fitness in determining custody, and I was going to make sure the judge saw just how morally unfit she had been of late. Sure enough, when our divorce proceedings began, things tilted in my favor. Denise presented the evidence of the affair tactfully but effectively. We submitted a transcript of the audio recording I'd captured of Michelle and Peter talking about being in love, as well as copies of some of their lovey-dovey emails. We emphasized how her deceit and the drama with Peter, who by this time was under criminal investigation, something I'll get to shortly, had caused emotional distress in the household. I also might have overplayed how the kids had nearly walked in on a situation. A slight exaggeration, but one that painted a picture of recklessness on her part. Michelle, for her part, looked mortified throughout the custody hearing. She barely spoke except to quietly say she loved the children and had always been their primary caregiver. But the damage was done. Her attorney didn't have much of a counter when faced with the mountain of evidence and her own admission of wrongdoing. By the end of it, the judge granted me primary physical custody of Emily and Leo, with Michelle receiving only limited visitation, every other weekend during daytime hours, at least until the kids were older. I was also awarded exclusive use of our house, at least until it could be sold or a settlement reached. As for assets, the split hadn't been large to begin with, but with me keeping the house, and the mortgage, and the majority of our savings, she was left with very little. The judge also noted that because Michelle had not worked in a decade and I was the sole earner, spousal support might normally be considered. But given the circumstances of her marital misconduct, he decided she wasn't entitled to alimony. I think even he could see how profoundly she'd broken the marriage. In the end, she agreed to everything, likely too exhausted and guilt-ridden to fight, and possibly relieved to avoid a drawn-out trial. Meanwhile, true to my promise, I had delivered Peter's compiled financial misdeeds to his firm's management and the authorities within a day of the barbecue showdown. That very week, I heard through the grapevine that Peter had been fired. Apparently, his bosses confronted him with the evidence, and he had little defense. An internal investigation was quickly launched, and soon law enforcement got involved when the scale of the embezzlement became clear. Peter was actually arrested about 2 weeks after that barbecue, led out of his condo in handcuffs in front of multiple witnesses. The news spread fast among our social circle and professional community. The mighty charming Peter Reynolds had fallen. I cooperated with the police investigation, providing a formal statement about how I came upon the evidence. I omitted the part about breaking into his condo, of course, framing it as documents that came into my possession. They didn't pry too much on that front. They had more than enough to nail him, and I suspect they were happy to have a solid case gift-wrapped for them. Within a month, my life had transformed completely. I was a single dad in practice, if not yet legally on paper, and my former best friend was facing a criminal trial. The initial storm was beginning to pass, but the aftermath was only starting. I'd gotten what I wanted on many fronts: public vindication, legal upper hand in the divorce, and retribution set in motion for Peter's crimes. Yet on quiet nights when the kids were asleep and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd sometimes be hit with a profound sadness. Despite everything, I'd never imagined my life would end up here. My marriage destroyed, my trust in people shattered. There were moments I questioned if I'd gone too far in my quest for revenge. But whenever doubt arose, I'd replay in my mind the image of Michelle in Peter's arms, or the sound of her saying she loved him. That steeled my resolve. They earned this outcome. One evening, after signing the last of the divorce papers and officially being granted the divorce decree, a fairly quick process since everything was uncontested in the end, I sat down in the now sparsely decorated living room of what used to be our shared home. I looked around at the family photos on the wall, most of which I'd be taking down, and felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. Justice, in a sense, had been served. I had legally won, but there was no real joy in it, only the somber satisfaction that I'd protected my kids and held the betrayers accountable. In the eyes of the law, I was now free of Michelle, and soon Peter would face the law's judgment as well. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely drank, and raised it silently in a toast to no one. Here's to endings, I thought, and downed it in one burn. What a ride the last few months had been, and it wasn't over yet, not for Michelle, and certainly not for Peter. Chapter 7. Paying the Price. A year passed, and life carried on in the aftermath of the storm. By the time the next summer rolled around, the shock and gossip in our community had largely died down, though the effects of those events were still unfolding for everyone involved. I focused on raising Emily and Leo, pouring my energy into being the best father I could. We settled into a new routine, just the three of us. In many ways, the kids thrived. Emily threw herself into her 5th grade studies and gymnastics classes, and Leo, now in 1st grade, was learning to ride his bike without training wheels. They still saw their mother occasionally, during the designated visitation times. But more often than not, Michelle would come down to our town for a day trip, rather than have them stay with her overnight. Whether that was out of consideration for their comfort or because of her own circumstances, I wasn't sure. Possibly both. Michelle had moved to a small town about an hour away, where her older sister lived. In the early months after the divorce, I heard bits and pieces about how she was doing, mostly through mutual acquaintances or the brief, polite exchanges we had about the children via email. She had no career to fall back on, no savings of her own beyond what little she got in the divorce, and certainly no support from Peter. He had his own troubles by then. So she did what many in her position do. She found whatever work she could. In her case, it was as a waitress at a little diner off the highway in her new town. I discovered this not from gossip, but by accident. One Saturday, I was driving the kids to a state park for a hiking trip and realized we were passing near Michelle's town around lunchtime. The kids knew it was close to where Mommy lived and started asking if we could see her. It wasn't a scheduled visit, but on a whim, I decided a brief stop might be okay. I hadn't seen Michelle face-to-face in nearly a year. Our handoffs of the kids had been handled by her sister or in public neutral spots before I drove off, and I often chose not to be present. Part of me was curious how she was holding up. Another part perhaps wanted to see, in person, the result of the choices she'd made. When we pulled into the town's main street, I spotted a small diner with a neon sign, the kind of place truckers and locals frequent. I figured it was as good a place as any to grab lunch with the kids, and if Michelle was working there as I'd heard, well, that wasn't entirely unintentional on my part. We walked in and took a booth. The place was clean but plain, with checkered floors and the smell of fried food hanging in the air. A few patrons sat at the counter chatting with the cook. I scanned the servers, and there she was. Michelle stood by the register, in a light blue uniform apron, her hair tied back. My breath caught for a moment. She looked thinner than I remembered, a little pale, tired. This was a far cry from the comfortable life she once led in our suburban home. Emily noticed her next. "Mom," she said in surprise. Michelle's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. When she saw us, saw the kids and me standing behind them, her eyes went wide and she instinctively brought her hand to her mouth. For a moment, she seemed frozen. I gave a small nod. "Hello, Michelle," I said quietly. She quickly glanced over her shoulder. A middle-aged waitress next to her gave her a curious look, and Michelle muttered something before that waitress took over at the register. Then Michelle approached our booth uncertainly. "Hi, kids," she said softly, her voice already thick with emotion. And, "Hi, Adam." Emily slid out of the booth and hugged her mother around the waist. Leo grinned and bounced in his seat, saying, "Mommy, we came to see you." Tears shone in Michelle's eyes as she hugged Emily back and reached out to stroke Leo's hair. "This is a surprise," she said, trying to smile. "I didn't know you were coming." "It was a last-minute decision," I replied evenly. "We're on the way to the park and thought we'd grab a bite." I left unsaid the obvious, that we'd hoped to see her. She wiped at her eyes and stood there awkwardly. "Well, I'm actually working right now." She motioned to her apron, almost apologetically. "Daddy, can we sit in Mommy's section so she can be our waitress?" Leo asked with innocent excitement. Michelle flushed, perhaps embarrassed for me to see her waiting tables, but I jumped in gently. "Of course. If that's okay with your manager?" She nodded. Yeah, it's fine." She guided us to a different booth, one in her area, and handed out menus with slightly shaking hands. It was surreal to have her serve us Cokes and burgers like any other customers, making small talk about what the kids have been up to. Still, beneath her professional smile, I could sense her heartbreak and shame. She barely looked me in the eye, directing most of her attention to the kids. While the kids ate, she stole moments to chat with them, asking about school and their hobbies. They happily filled her in on everything, oblivious to the tension between their parents. I mostly observed quietly. At one point, when the kids were busy drawing on their paper placemats, Michelle spoke to me in a low voice. "They've gotten so big," she said, eyes fixed on Leo, who was making a messy ketchup smiley face on his burger bun. "I miss being with them every day." I nodded, not quite sure what to say. "They're doing well," I replied. "I've kept them in the same school, same routine. They seem happy." "Good. That's good," she murmured, then hesitated. "And you? How are you?" It was the first time she'd asked me that, and for a moment I was taken aback. "I'm all right," I said after a pause. It wasn't a lie. I had found a rhythm in single parenthood and even a measure of peace. "Busy with work and the kids, you know." She nodded, looking down at her hands. Her nails were short and unpolished now, a detail I noticed oddly. She used to have them done regularly. "I'm glad," she said softly. You you look good." I wasn't sure how to respond. This sort of personal exchange felt out of bounds, but I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, the longing for a connection that was now severed. Before I could think of a reply, a cook called her name for an order up, and she excused herself to grab it. We left shortly after finishing our meal. I paid the bill. Michelle seemed pained that I tipped her, but I insisted, slipping the cash onto the table. As we were walking out, Michelle embraced the kids once more. "I'll see you in a couple weeks, okay?" she said, referring to the next planned visit. They hugged her tightly. It was time for us to go, and I gently ushered the kids outside. Before I stepped through the door, I glanced back at her. She stood by the booth clearing our plates, but her eyes were on us, on me. There was a world of hurt and regret in that gaze. I gave her a polite nod goodbye. For a split second, I thought to myself that I felt sorry for her. She looked so defeated and lonely. But then I reminded myself that this was the price of her actions. This was her life now, and I had my own to live. Back in the car, the kids chattered about how funny it was to see Mommy at work and how good the milkshakes were. I responded in monosyllables, my mind elsewhere. The encounter left me shaken in a way I hadn't expected. It's one thing to hear that your ex-wife is struggling. It's another to witness it firsthand. As for Peter, his reckoning came more directly from Lady Justice. He had been indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and whatever else the prosecutors could throw at him. He initially pleaded not guilty, some foolish attempt at fighting the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. His lawyer eventually struck a deal with the prosecution. In exchange for pleading guilty to several major counts, they dropped a few lesser ones. Even so, he wasn't getting off lightly. The day of his sentencing, I found an article about it in the Detroit Free Press. The headline read, "Local businessman sentenced in fraud scheme." I skimmed through the piece and learned that Peter received a sentence of 5 years in state prison, along with hefty fines and an order to pay restitution to his former company. 5 years. In reality, with good behavior, he might serve 3 or so, but it was still a significant fall from grace. The article mentioned how the judge had stern words for him about abusing trust and greed. It even referenced a statement from an unnamed whistleblower, that would be me, though I wasn't identified, who provided evidence that accelerated the investigation. It gave me a grim sense of closure seeing it in black and white. Peter's name, once associated with success and charm in our social circles, was now synonymous with crime and betrayal. Needless to say, he lost most of his friends. Aside from perhaps his immediate family, who I'd heard were devastated and ashamed, he had no one. Last I heard, even the woman I'd seen in that old Polaroid wanted nothing to do with him. Sometimes I wondered what he thought about in his jail cell at night. Did he regret his choices? Did he blame me for his downfall? Or did he recognize that he'd walked into ruin by his own greed and disloyalty? It didn't really matter. His opinions and existence were far removed from my world now. Both Michelle and Peter had paid dearly for their mistakes. One lost her family and comfortable life, the other lost his freedom and career. The two people who once flaunted a secret affair now had nothing to show for it except broken lives. And what about me? In the quiet moments when I'd reflect on it all, I realized that, in a sense, I had also paid a price. I had lost a wife and a best friend, and with them, my trust and the life I thought I knew. But what I gained was far more precious. A future where I wasn't living a lie, and the sole focus on what truly mattered: my children and my own well-being. A colleague of mine, who knew only broad strokes of what happened, once commented, "Man, that's some story. You must feel vindicated." I told him I did, and it's true. I felt vindicated and then some. But it wasn't a gleeful victory. It was the kind of satisfaction that comes with grimly settling accounts. Everyone got what they had coming. Standing on the other side of that year, I could see how far we'd all fallen and how far I'd climbed back up. The price had been paid by each of us in different ways, and now perhaps we could all begin to truly move on. Chapter 8. Victory Without Regrets. Late one afternoon, about a year and a half after my world first fell apart, I found myself sitting on the back porch of my home, now my home alone, watching Emily and Leo kick a soccer ball around the yard. The lawn was a bit overgrown in patches. Yard work can slip when you're a single parent balancing a career. But the kids didn't mind. Their laughter floated through the warm air, and even our dog Buddy trotted happily alongside them, tail wagging. It was a scene of simple, wholesome normalcy, the kind I'd feared might be lost forever at one point. I sipped a glass of iced tea and stretched my legs out, feeling truly at peace. So much had changed, yet in that moment, everything felt right. The kids were all right. Resilient little troopers who had adjusted to our new family dynamics with a capacity that amazed me. We talked openly now, in age-appropriate ways, about the divorce. They understood Mommy and Daddy weren't together, and that Mommy had made a big mistake that hurt Daddy. I never badmouthed Michelle to them, but I also wouldn't lie and manufacture a false narrative. It was a delicate balance, but their therapist, yes, I'd gotten them into a few counseling sessions just to be safe, said I handled it as well as one could. As for me, I had thrown myself into providing a stable, loving home. Weekends were for pancakes and cartoons in the morning, soccer games and park visits in the afternoon, and movie nights with popcorn on the couch. We created new traditions, just the three of us, and in doing so, healed bit by bit. I won't pretend it was all smooth sailing. There were nights I'd wake up from a dream about the old days, or about the betrayal, heart pounding with leftover anger or sadness. But those nights became fewer and farther between. I glanced at the small vegetable garden at the side of the yard, the one Michelle used to tend. Weeds had crept in since she'd left, and only a few resilient tomato plants were still producing. Instead of feeling bitter at the sight, I felt motivated. Perhaps this weekend the kids and I would clear it out and plant something new, start fresh in that little patch of earth. My phone buzzed on the patio table with a new message. It was from an old mutual friend of Peter's and mine, one who had firmly taken my side after everything. He occasionally sent updates he thought I might want to know. Heard Peter's officially in Jackson prison now. Rough place, but maybe it'll reform him. Hope you're doing well, man. I stared at the message for a moment. Once news about Peter would have sent me into a tailspin of anger. Now I felt almost nothing. Perhaps a glint of grim satisfaction, but mostly indifference. He was a non-factor in my life. I typed back a quick response. Thanks for the heads up. We're good here. And that was the truth. We were good. Just then, Emily and Leo came bounding up the porch steps, sweaty and breathless. Dad, did you see that goal I scored? Leo piped, his face lit with pride. I sure did, buddy. Top corner. Messi would be jealous, I grinned, ruffling his hair. He beamed at the comparison to his favorite soccer player. Emily plopped down next to me. Can we order pizza tonight? She asked, eyes pleading in that way she knew was hard to resist. I chuckled. Pizza, huh? I was thinking of cooking some healthy spinach and broccoli stew, I teased. They both groaned theatrically. I broke into a laugh. All right, pizza it is. Go wash up first, both of you. Hands, faces, the works. You guys are grass-stained and sticky. They scampered off, cheering about the promised feast. I watched them disappear into the house, and a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. We had come through the fire intact. After everything that happened, one might expect me to be cynical or bitter. And perhaps I was for a time. Trusting others didn't come easily to me for a while. But I also learned about my own strength and about the importance of setting things right. Some people might say I went too far, that I exacted a revenge too harsh. I've heard whispers from a few acquaintances. Did he really have to humiliate them like that? Couldn't he have handled it quietly? To that I say, walk a mile in my shoes, feel what I felt, then you can judge. In truth, I don't regret how I handled it. By confronting them publicly and pushing for justice both personally and legally, I reclaimed my sense of agency. I made sure that betrayal had consequences. Could I have done it with a tad more tact or mercy? Perhaps. But mercy was not on my mind after what they did. And looking at where we all are now, I firmly believe I chose the path that ensured the best outcome for the ones who mattered. My children, and yes, myself. Michelle and I remain civil for the kids' sake. She has apologized more times than I can count, and while I told her I appreciated it, I also made it clear that forgiveness, if it ever comes, would be on my terms and timetable. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive her or Peter, and that's okay. I've let go of the anger, but I haven't forgotten the lesson. Some actions are simply unforgivable in the scope of a single lifetime. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues over our backyard, I dialed the pizza place to place our usual order: pepperoni and mushrooms for me and Em, plain cheese for Leo. The kid at the other end recognized my order and joked, "You guys must really love pizza night." I smiled and thought, "Yeah, we do. It's ours now." After I hung up, I leaned on the porch railing and took in a deep breath of the mild evening air. There was a serenity in that moment that I doubted I could have felt a year ago. I had been drowning then, in hurt, in rage, in confusion. Now, I'd swum to shore and stood on solid ground. My family, though smaller, was intact. My home was peaceful. And my future, once so intertwined with two people who betrayed me, was now mine to shape without their shadows looming over us. When the kids returned, cleaned up and giggling about some silly joke between them, I felt a swell of pride. They had been through so much, but their smiles were as genuine as ever. We went inside, and I flicked on the porch light behind us, casting a warm glow over the stepping stones in the yard. Later, after pizza and homework checks and bedtime stories, and the inevitable requests for a second glass of water, the house grew quiet. I peeked in on Emily and Leo, both sound asleep, their faces soft and angelic in the glow of nightlights. These were the moments that truly mattered, I realized. The calm after the storm, the love that remained. I stepped outside once more, standing on the porch in the cool night. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of a train horn and the rustle of a breeze through the trees. I thought about the journey we'd taken, the pain and the triumph. If I could go back in time, would I do it all the same? I believed so. Because in the end, I didn't just seek revenge, I sought justice for myself and my children. And I achieved it. As I locked up the house for the night, I caught my reflection in the glass of the back door. I saw a man who had been tested in the cruelest of ways and had emerged stronger. A man who chose his dignity and his children's well-being over vengeance for vengeance's sake. A man who, despite the turmoil, had no regrets about standing up for himself. Before heading to bed, I paused by a shelf in the living room where a new family photo sat in a frame. It was just me, Emily, and Leo at the beach, all three of us grinning ear to ear, sun-kissed and carefree. No lies, no secrets, just us. That photo represented a hard-won happiness. I turned off the lights and made my way upstairs, feeling hopeful. Our story had been a painful one, yes, but it was also one of resilience and true justice. The scars would remain, but they were only a part of me, not the whole. I had my children, I had peace of mind, and I had the freedom to start anew. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I did so with a clear conscience and a guarded but open heart. The nightmare was over, and a new day was waiting. In this victory of mine, this victory without regrets, I finally felt ready to embrace whatever the future might hold.